File this one in the long list of trials I wish I could have seen live streamed. Jussie Smollett, really anything from any January 6th case, and now Andy Ngo trying to get some semblance of justice from his Antifa attackers. And in this case, it's not just about the spectacle. It's about some of the facts at issue too, because some of the description of this Antifa defense lawyer's alleged behavior in court is so ridiculous, I gotta see it to believe it. But we don't get to see it because apparently this trial was disrupted early and often, with the judge noting at the start of the proceedings there were several threats of violence and threats to dox jurors. During the trial, there were several disruptions, with the judge threatening to hold these disruptors in contempt of court. Jurors had expressed fear of being identified and targeted, and so with all of these factors in combination, the judge issued strict security measures on the proceedings, no public access, and credentialed media only. But of course, you can't keep the unruly activists away entirely if the unruly activists are part of the case itself. Now, for most of you, the saga of Andy Ngo versus Antifa in Portland needs no retelling, but just in case, Andy has been documenting the Antifa destruction of the city for years, most famously in 2019 when he was attacked on video in broad daylight in the middle of a street in a case in which Portland police did not intervene, and Andy was hospitalized with a brain bleed, among other injuries.
Fucking owned, bitch!
And in lieu of the usual media circus that otherwise sensationalizes mere criticism as an attack on the free press and democracy itself, that actual physical attack on a reporter was mostly met with shrugs, and if it was even covered at all, plenty of questions about what Andy must have done to deserve it. The attacks continued when Andy returned to on-the-ground reporting in 2021, and that is the incident primarily at issue here. Andy was undercover with Antifa goons celebrating a year of rioting after George Floyd. The mob identified him and then, of course, chased him down the street, beating him intermittently until Andy was able to find refuge in a hotel building. Without any justice through the criminal system, Andy brought a civil lawsuit to hold his attackers accountable for several of these incidents between 2019 and 2021. And there have been several developments in who Andy can actually sue. Initially, Andy filed the suit against Rose City Antifa, but that was thrown out because the group isn't technically a legal organization. Andy's suit against individuals involved was allowed to proceed, though, but of course, asking these degenerates to show up in court went exactly as you'd expect. A lot of them didn't. One defendant did reach a settlement in July, but the court found 3 more in default, as in they never showed up at all. Those damages are now to be assessed later, including against a guy involved in that infamous 2019 milkshaking, Joseph Christian Evans, or at least former guy, or maybe sometimes guy. Evans has since changed his name to Samika Overkill Shot Deputy, and his gender to non-binary. So I guess in this case, the lyrics are reversed. He did shoot the deputy, but he did not beat up Andy Ngo, even though it's on video. Unclear if he's trying to get himself off the hook by changing his name and transitioning his gender. Also unclear if he got the hook off himself to show that he's serious. But all of those pre-trial complexities left 2 defendants who actually did show up to defend themselves against Andy's claims related to that May 2021 beating in which Andy fled to the hotel. And as clear as it is that Andy was beaten in general, this case is much more complicated than that, because Andy sued these 2 not for attacking him, but for assisting and enabling the attack. John Hacker is an appropriately named Antifa investigator, to put it politely, a doxer, to be more cynical, a guy who says his role is to identify and expose any right-wing actors at Antifa events. If you're curious, he was seriously burned earlier in his life in an unrelated incident. Elizabeth Richter, from what I can tell, has a less skilled role. She just stirs people up to commit the beatings, or at least that's what she did in this case. Andy did not sue these 2 for beating him. He acknowledged in his own testimony they did not do that. Instead, Andy sued them for assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress for their roles in encouraging and assisting others to do it. And there is solid evidence that they did. On May 28, 2021, Andy was undercover at this Antifa 1 year of destroying downtown anniversary bash when John Hacker, suspecting a black-clad and goggled Andy was indeed him, approached him. Upon questioning, Hacker believed he identified Andy, and he relayed that information to an Antifa-friendly journalist. At that point, the mob was alerted, and the chase and the beatings were on. John Hacker admits to confronting Andy before the beatings happened. That much is not in dispute. Elizabeth Richter, meanwhile, tweeted Andy's location as he fled, adding another tweet later to say it was a badass comrade of hers. One would assume she's referring to Hacker, but she disputes that. It was a badass comrade of hers who spotted Andy and made the beating possible. Richter also, according to her own tweets, pursued Andy during the chase. When Andy found safety in that hotel, she stood outside yelling threats at him.
I can't wait for you to come out, Andy. You thought the milkshakes were bad last time. We're gonna beat the fuck out of you, bitch.
Hacker was also present through the chase. In one video clip, during the chase and beating, an Antifa attacker is seen putting his hand on Hacker's shoulder in what Andy's lawyers say is a congratulatory manner, as in, hey, congratulations on identifying him so that we could kick his ass. Hacker and Richter have a series of denials that seem to defy the evidence. Hacker says he actually feels very sorry for Andy. He says the beating was heartbreaking, but he didn't do the beating and he has no idea who did. Richter says the same. Despite the congratulations he apparently received, and despite Hacker's entire role, as he describes it himself, being sophisticated methods to identify people. He can identify anybody at any time, just not his friends, apparently. Oh, but these aren't Hacker's friends, we're supposed to believe. The guys who beat up Andy are just randos with absolutely no identifying characteristics whatsoever. Hacker's expertise is no match for just their anonymity in particular. Richter said she didn't even know Andy was in the hotel until she got there, despite tweeting Andy's location during the chase, describing on Twitter how she was running with Andy and trying to sneak into the hotel after him, and streaming his location throughout. She deleted those tweets, and while she acknowledged at trial that they were posted to her account, she now says she has no recollection of writing them. So I guess Elon Musk must have planted those tweets when the Bird Reich took over. In fact, Richter and Hacker deny any ongoing cooperation with each other at all. On exactly who Richter was referring to as the badass comrade who identified Andy, Richter now says she doesn't remember who she was talking about. Hacker testified that he is also unaware to whom Richter was referring with that tweet. With forgetfulness like that, you'd think they're the ones with the head injuries, but that's the story that they went with. And even though I don't personally believe that they're telling the truth, there is still legal complexity in this case. To what degree do you have to enable or encourage a beating without actually doing the beating yourself to be liable for that beating? On the philosophical level, there are considerations for the line between free speech and violence, and on the legal level, in the courtroom, there's the application of Oregon law. Of course, I'm not an Oregon lawyer to explain to you those boundaries of Oregon law, but you would think the defense attorney might. As much as I do think these two are bad actors, I can still see a plausible defense for them in the form of, yeah, the beating was bad, yeah, the beating was criminal even, but these two did not do the beating. They engaged in only speech, and so even if what they did was wrong, it does not rise to legal liability. Instead, though, at least according to reporters' characterizations and quotes, this defense lawyer's closing argument was less about the facts and the law and more about ideological compliance in the form of emotional appeal and perhaps even in the form of a veiled threat. this defense lawyer went full Antifa activist herself. She smeared Andy Ngo as a non-credible journalist who lies and provides half-truths, as though that's relevant to who's responsible for beating him up. She said resistance in this country has never been peaceful, as though as long as you're resisting Andy Ngo, all legal constraints no longer apply. And she declared, quote, "I am Antifa," reportedly attempting to soften the organization's image from terroristic to just civil rights activism. And she said she would wear a t-shirt identifying herself as such after the trial. Bizarre, sure, but in fairness, she is representing a private client, not the state, so I guess it's up to the jury whether they find that case persuasive or not. But the problem is, it appears it wasn't really left up to the jury, actually. There were methods of influence deployed outside the normal rules, apparently, even by this defense attorney herself. In her closing argument, the lawyer said she'd be retiring after this trial. It would be her last, but she told the jurors she, quote, "will remember each one of their faces." I guess we're supposed to believe that's some sort of comfort? That the jury can feel good about an old woman reminiscing in her rocking chair about her final trial and all the many faces of the jury. Another way to interpret that, though, is, hey guys, your faces in here are the same faces outside the courthouse. So understand that when you leave and make your decision accordingly, because it would be a real shame if you were recognized on the street after deciding wrongly in the context of a trial otherwise disrupted with threats, and jurors expressing fear about being publicly identified, and this defense lawyer personally identifying with Antifa tactics. But no, that's not a threat. It's just a reminder that a friendly old lady will be thinking fondly about you later. And even if the jury wasn't threatened, a reporter was. Much of what we know about this trial is through the reporting of Katie Daviscourt of the Post-Millennial. On Tuesday, she said Elizabeth Richter, one of the defendants, joined a mob of activists roaming around the courthouse, generally harassing her. And that same day, the reporter's car was broken into and looted. Windows shattered, items stolen, and the car wasn't even parked near the courthouse. Now, in fairness, I could believe this was actually the work of some uninvolved Portland tweakers, but it's probably not unreasonable to assume there's some relationship between the harassment at the courthouse and this result. On Thursday, the jury returned their judgment not liable for either defendant, so the jury apparently felt just as warmly toward the retiring defense attorney, who will now reminisce about their faces even more fondly. Andy is expected to get some sort of damages awarded later from the Antifa defendants who didn't show up, and of course he got the one settlement too, but other than that, there is little justice to be found here. The people who have attacked Andy have never been criminally charged, with the one exception of a case against John Hacker when he poured some water on Andy and took his phone at a local gym, a charge on which Hacker was later acquitted, and probably the most minor attack committed on Andy anyway. And but for what will probably be just small sums that are maybe never even claimed anyway, there is no intervention in the continued attack on not just the First Amendment right to investigate and publish information about the ongoing decay of a major American city, but just the basic right to walk around in that city in peace if you're an enemy of this mob. No criminal responsibility, no civil responsibility. No responsibility from lawless attackers means there will be no corresponding responsibility in the response of the victims, and that set of circumstances means it will get messier and more hostile, not more orderly and more civil. The beatings will continue until morale improves, in other words. And with morale running so low in this city, it's sure going to take a lot more beatings. But don't worry, though. If you're concerned that you might get caught up in all of that morale improvement, take comfort in knowing they will remember your face fondly. Right after they punch it out of recognition, of course. It's not justice, sure, but after all, it is the thought that counts, right? Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.